Welcome to another episode of Forgotten Heroes on the Really True Sports Network. I'm your host for Forgotten Heroes, Mike Goodpaster, and today we're going to talk about Greg Cook. Now, a lot of you younger people say, who's Greg Cook? But when Bill Walsh says he's the most talented quarterback you've ever seen, and Bob Trumpy kind of says the same thing, Sam Weiss talked about him the same way, you look at Greg Cook and you think, what could have been for the Cincinnati Bengals franchise? Now, Cook broke dozens of passing records at the University of Cincinnati. He was scouted and eventually drafted by Bengals founder and head coach Paul Brown with the number 5 overall pick in the 1969 draft. He became the first rookie quarterback to start the first game of the season, which didn't happen again until 2011 when Andy Dalton started against the Browns in Week 1. Cook was a rare talent and a natural passer coming out of the University of Cincinnati, and with the right coaching had the potential to be one of the greatest of all time. Now, Cook led the Bengals to 3 straight wins to start the 1969 season, but he injured his shoulder in the third game against the Kansas City Chiefs. Backup quarterback, the recently deceased Sam Weiss, started the next 4 games, all 4 losses, before Cook returned in Week 8 to beat the Oakland Raiders. Unfortunately, after playing to a tie in Week 9, the Bengals lost the rest of their games. In that rookie season, Cook passed for 1,854 yards, 15 touchdowns, which earned him the AFL passing title as a rookie, and he was named the UPI's Offensive Rookie of the Year. His 9.41 yards pass per attempt is the oldest standing Bengals record, and the only one still standing from the time they played at Nippert Stadium. The only Bengals quarterback to get close was Boomer Esiason in his 1988 MVP season when he averaged 9.21 yards per attempt. Unfortunately, during that third game of the season, Cook had torn his rotator cuff, and due to the limited medical technology at the time, the injury went undiagnosed. Instead of receiving the necessary surgery, he only received cortisone shots, which helped the pain but allowed his rotator cuff in his shoulder to deteriorate. He had surgery in the offseason where it was discovered that the top of his rotator cuff being torn and his bicep was partially detached. Cook said in an interview with Sports Illustrated that he felt obligated to finish the season after the team's good start. I took cortisone shots and played in pain, he says. But the shoulder hadn't started to deteriorate yet, so I could still function. I still had the strength. I felt obligated to finish the season. I'd gotten off to a good start, and I didn't want to relinquish that. Doctors, unfortunately, were unable to prepare Cook's shoulder at the time, and he sat out of football for the next 2 seasons. Cook tried to come back in 1973, but his injury stopped him from being able to throw the football like he once did. After that, Cook decided to call it quits. He, in an interview with the Dayton Daily News, said, I may try to lob a few passes between now and then just to see if there's some kind of medical miracle, but I don't expect one. As far as I'm concerned, this is it. It's all over. Now, the NFL Network had a countdown of their top 10 one-hit wonders of all time. They named Greg Cook number 1. Former Bengals tight end, radio talk show host in Cincinnati, Bob Trumpy, had this to say. He said, I don't know what he would have done if he'd have played for 10 or 12 years, but I think my fingers would be filled with Super Bowl rings. Bill Walsh, who was the architect of the Bengals offense, which later became the West Coast offense, believed that the actual offensive scheme would have been vastly different if he had more time to work with Cook. Walsh, in an interview about 30 years ago, said, I think the West Coast offense would have been completely different. It wouldn't have been a West Coast offense. It would have started with the deep strike, and everything would have played off of that. It would have set records that never would be broken. He said nostalgically, with his eyes getting misty, Greg Cook, what a great talent, what a great shame. In his short time with the Bengals, Cook made such an impact that Bengals fans actually picked him the best player in history to ever wear number 12. Not a lot of competition there, Neil O'Donnell, Jack Thompson, Quan Cosby. But still, he's remembered in Cincinnati, especially, older folks. My dad, when he was alive, used to talk about Greg Cook, and he told me, he said it was the greatest quarterback he'd ever saw. Now, On his passing, Bengals owner Mike Brown, well, let's go back a little bit. Cook struggled with his health. He had pneumonia, hospitalized, and ended up passing away from that. But when he passed away, Bengals owner Mike Brown said, Greg was the single most talented player we've ever had with the Bengals. His career was tragically cut short due to the injury. Had he been able to stay healthy, I believe he would have been the player of his era in the NFL. Greg was a personal friend to me, Brown added. He was a good person whose company I enjoyed over all his years as a player and after that. I feel a great loss at his passing. Now, the would have been, what could have been here, there's a lot of what could have beens here. I mean, number one, the Cincinnati Bengals in 1969 were only a year away from being a playoff team. Now, Virgil Carter, Sam Weiss were the other quarterbacks, so you had the development of what's now known as the West Coast offense because Virgil Carter was the starter in 70, didn't have a lot of arm strength, and it was a way to work around that. So what happens if Bill Walsh doesn't change the offense and he has Greg Cook? I mean, I think it's possible when you look at the Bengals of the 70s. The 70 Bengals made the playoffs after starting the season at 1-6. They won 7 straight games, including a 45-7 rout over the Boston Patriots, last game of the season. They go to the playoffs. They play the Baltimore Colts. Defensively, they played well against Johnny Unitas and his team, but offensively, the Bengals couldn't get anything going. They ended up losing 17-0. 1973, the Bengals were 10-4. Pretty good team. And they were down, I think, like 21-16 at the half to that great Dolphins team. Ended up losing 34-16. 1975, once again, the Bengals make the playoffs and end up losing 31-28 in Oakland. 1976, you get the year where they blew 2 opportunities to make the playoffs. Number one was in the snow against the Pittsburgh Steelers at Riverfront Stadium, where it's clear and sunny, and it gets dark. And at halftime, you get like 6 inches of snow. Boobie Clark fumbles the ball. Franco Harris scores. Bengals lose at the end of the game, 7-3. A week later, on Monday Night Football, the Cincinnati Bengals play the Oakland Raiders. The Bengals lose, I think it was 35-20. They missed the playoffs. 1977, the Bengals finally beat the Steelers when it matters. They beat them on, I think it was a touchdown pass to Bob Trumpy. Bengals win the game. All they have to do is go to Houston and beat the Oilers in the Astrodome. And they lose 21-17. And then, of course, 78-79, they fell apart. But look at it like this. If Greg Cook stays, maybe it changes who would have been the head coach here. I mean, if you win a Super Bowl in 1973, or you win a Super Bowl in 1970 or 71 or 72, whatever, maybe Paul Brown retires sooner. Maybe he gives a job to Bill Walsh. Maybe he doesn't, because I think a lot of that was jealousy because he knew how smart Walsh was, and he didn't want somebody following that might be as good. But when you look back at it, Greg Cook would have been in, his 12th season in 1981, that Super Bowl. And this is not to knock Kenny Anderson, who I've had on our Legends show. He's a great guy. He was a hell of a quarterback and probably deserving of the Hall of Fame. But it makes you wonder, what exactly happens if Greg Cook never gets hurt? Maybe the Bengals are included in the same breath with the Dolphins, Raiders, and Steelers of the 70s in the AFC. Maybe they win a Super Bowl or two with him. Maybe they don't lose Super Bowl 16 to him. Maybe things are changed. There's so many maybes and so many what-ifs. I'm talking about a Cincinnati Bengal. But the sad part is Greg Cook. The sad part isn't the fact that Greg Cook never got to be what he could have been as a football player, because Greg Cook struggled later in life, and if he never gets hurt, maybe that struggle never happens. Maybe there's more money there, and everything's all right. The problem is we'll never know. We can only sit here and guess on what might have been. But I think it's safe to say Greg Cook was a special football player, and he was on the verge of being maybe one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Now, I didn't personally see him play. I was born in 1968, but from my father to Bill Walsh to Paul Brown to Mike Brown, I mean, Bob Trumpy, all these guys that saw him, all these guys that played with him, Bob Johnson, who I interviewed, they all think Super Bowl rings would have been in Cincinnati if he would have been here and been healthy. Unfortunately, that never happened. And the Bengals are the Bengals. I mean, stuff like that happens, from Kajana Carter to him to Greg Cook. I mean, injuries happen, bad things happen. Carson Palmer's knee gets taken out. Andy Dalton's thumb gets messed up. That's just Bengals football. So, as a Bengals fan, especially one at the age I'm at, where I don't remember him, but it was right after him, and to hear so many people that I respected football-wise talk about how great Greg Cook could have been, it always makes you wonder how things could have been different in Cincinnati without that Game 3 torn rotator cuff. Or if it happens 30 years later, where they can fix it without a problem. But that is our Forgotten Heroes show today. Make sure you tune in. If you want to know when the next one's going to be, we'll give you a little heads up. You can follow me on Twitter at Grueling Truth. Make sure you listen to all our shows on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you hear sports podcast. You'll find the Grueling Truth. So for now, this has been Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to the Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.